about us as being probably the most evil people in the world, ever.
To which illegal, improper, unethical activities.
Senator Sam Ervin, a Democrat from North Carolina, was the chairman.
First, I want to thank you for swapping places with me.
Tennessee Republican Howard Baker had been named the vice chair.
No way on earth I could swap places with you.
And one of the first things I did was to call the White House and ask for an appointment with President Nixon. President Nixon was in his little office in the EOB, the old Executive Office building. I remember beginning the conversation by saying, Mr. President, I want to let you know that as senior Republican on the committee, I'll be there to do my job, but I'll also be there to make sure you get a fair shake. Just as I was leaving, I said to President Nixon, you know, John Mitchell, who was Attorney General for President Nixon, I said, I know John, and I certainly hope he's not in any trouble. And I remember vividly that President Nixon sort of looked down and said, well, he might be. And at that moment, there was a light bulb went on in my head, and I thought, you know, there's more to this than I know.
Characterize that memorandum as
fighting some minority members of the committee, Fred Thompson as minority counsel, and Senator Baker, who was the minority leader on the committee. They were attempting to constrict the hearings, to only take about a couple weeks or so, only pick at the highlights, call people like Haldeman or so, and then close, because they said the public would get tired of us.
I always thought that the heart of it, the root of it, was a bunch of young guys getting together trying to impress a bunch of older guys. You know, but look what I was able to do, and look at the information that I was able to get. And the older guys didn't stop it.
That I could not use as my defense the story that the operation had been a CIA operation because it was not true.
James McCord, the Watergate burglar who had blown the whistle on the White House pressure to remain silent, was among the first witnesses.
Of all the witnesses that I put on in the Watergate hearings, I think James McCord was the one I had the most sympathy for. He, too, had a strange, distorted view of America, and I don't think the Constitution or the Bill of Rights was in it. But he was a loyalist, a true loyalist.
The organization to be one of the finest organizations of its kind.
McCord's testimony would put President Nixon on the defensive.
By now, I was completely convinced that the White House was behind the idea and the ploy which had been presented, and that the White House was turning ruthless, in my opinion, and would do whatever was politically expedient at any one particular point in time to accomplish its own ends.
He wanted to tell the story that this had been a White House ordered operation, that he, and particularly the Cubans, had done it as a matter of patriotism. They were following the president's orders. They were not low-life burglars. To him, being called a burglar, his own self-perception of himself as a CIA agent, as a father, as a parent, it just destroyed him, and he really wanted to get that out.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCord. The council will call the next...
He was asked what he thought of himself now, and he said, I cannot now understand how I could have committed this crime. It was a crime, and I'm sorry for it. I mean, but in a sense, he was a victim, because he was a victim of the power of the White House, taking people who are loyal like McCord and having them commit very serious crimes.
The next witness is Mr. Hugh Sloan,
Mr. Sloan, will you raise your right hand? You swear that the evidence...
As treasurer of the committee to re-elect the president, Hugh Sloan had regularly been told to dish out hard cash, 50 grand here, 100 grand there, by men he trusted.
Hugh Sloan was caught in the middle on this, and he received orders that he was to allow G. Gordon Liddy, who was the one who was running the whole break-in thing, to get money as he called on it.
Could you tell us what denominations generally the cash was in?
I would say generally the cash was in $100 bills, although at times there were 50s, 20s, 10s. At one point, I think we even had some $1,000 bills.
Now, with regard
As each day went by and more things came to light, it became more and more obvious to me anyway that I'd unwittingly financed this through campaign funds, and that clearly the campaign organization was involved.
He just felt that he also had been misused. He had no real understanding of the so-called Watergate plan until it later came out, and that he knew the role he had played in it.
A campaign official had told him to lie about the payments to Liddy.
Came across to me, and it was a very brief reference. He said something to the effect that the Liddy money is a problem. It's very politically sensitive. We can just not come out with a high figure. We're going to have to come out with a different figure. Well, I said to him, he must have been insistent, because I remember making to him on that occasion the statement, I have no intention of perjuring myself.
And what did he say to you when you said that?
He said, you may have to. Some people told the truth, and some people lied. And the balance of that is really quite astounding in this case, because I would say the vast majority chose the route of lying about it.
Sloan had turned to the campaign chairman, John Mitchell, for advice.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Mitchell at that time?
Yes, sir.
What was that discussion?
I was essentially asking him for guidance. The campaign literally at this point was falling apart before your eyes. Nobody was coming up with any answers as to what was really going on. I had some very strong concerns about where all this money had gone. I essentially asked him for guidance, at which point he told me, well, when the going gets tough, the tough get going.
Did he say anything else to you?
Quite frankly, Mr. Dash, that is the one thing that really sticks in my mind. I think I left at that point.
Yeah.
A lot of the young people, their only life experience since college was basically working for a Haldeman or an Ehrlichman, and are suddenly in the big sweep of the White House, and they had no other touchstone. People had been in the military, at least, for instance, had done some other things in between. I think had some real independence of judgment, whereas these people just went down with the ship. With regard to that interview...
Sloan was the only one who protested and hesitated and was persuaded. But with Magruder, certainly with John Dean, certainly with Liddy and his group, the very plan as it was approved, they followed through without even any opposition. But you have to understand again the mindset. John Mitchell, when he was testifying before the committee, was asked, what would have led you as the chief law enforcement officer of the country, as the Attorney General of the United States, to agree to such crimes? And Mitchell, who liked to puff his pipe, said, well, he said, Senator, I would have done anything to get this president reelected. And one of the senators said, anything, Mr. Mitchell?
When you found out all these crimes and conspiracies and cover-ups were being committed, why on earth didn't you walk in the president's office and tell him the truth?
It wasn't a question of telling the truth. It was a question of not involving him at all, so that he could go on through the campaign without being involved in this type of activity. And I'm talking about the White House horrors particularly.
I'd understand from your response that you place the expediency of the next election above your responsibility as an intimate to advise the president of the peril that surrounded him. Here was his deputy campaign director involved. Here was his two closest associates in his office involved. All around him were people involved in crime, perjury, accessory after the fact, and you deliberately refused to tell him that.
Senator,
did you state that the expediency of the election was more important than that?
Senator, I think you put it exactly correct. In my mind, the re-election of Richard Nixon, compared with what was available on the other side, was so much more important that I put it in just that context.
Do you think anything short of a trial...
Like the rest of the country, the White House was watching the televised hearings.